What followed was what can only be described as a long day of reconciliation and discovery. I had told her that I still felt that we could never be together in the way that our parents had hoped. How could I possibly hold to this when every fiber of my flesh longed to be ever closer to her? I did not know. But I had resolved that I would attempt in some way to compensate her for the pain I had caused her. I would not, as Yuri had feared, immediately sell out my shares in the assets my parents had held. I would work with Yuri and try to keep the estate intact, as I would also build upon whatever remnants were left of my relationship with Diana. The major obstacle in both these endeavors would be that both Diana and Yuri still held firm to the belief that the family itself was under threat by the enemies that had been described to me throughout my childhood. Around 8 years before the execution of Maximiano, in 1879, the occultist and writer Edward Bulwer Lytton had written a book detailing the use of a peculiar energy source by a super race of subterranean angelic dwellers called Vril. Legend states that a secret society of German occultists had taken this work as alluding to a real energy source and had taken it upon themselves to seek out this energy. It is said that many members of the Nazi inner circle were members of this society and had gone to great lengths to acquire the Vril power source unsuccessfully. In our family, it is said that upon the first publication of the Book of the Skull, that it was realized by members of the Vril Society that many of the details described by Afanasi seemed to indicate a greater knowledge of these occult powers. However, as publication of the tome was halted and existing copies subsequently destroyed, acquisition of the book became increasingly difficult. It is rumored that the one copy possessed by the actual society was acquired by the Russians as they invaded Berlin and was soon burned. The only remaining copies of the book were carefully guarded by the remaining descendants of Maximiano Maskhadov. Yuri and my parents believed that the Vril Society had reformed and was actively seeking to acquire the last copies, and were intent on destroying what remained of our family in order to possess them. My parents and Diana's husband had been tortured in order to gain further information concerning the whereabouts of the books. When they had failed to provide this information, they were killed. The ridiculousness of this paranoid delusion was a cancer of doubt gnawing away at my brain. I had resolved that I would delve into the facts concerning the murders in order to finally rid Diana of this madness for good. "But you do not understand," Diana said to me as we sat by the lake, hours later in the rising summer heat. "I understand completely that you are still brainwashed by their fairy tales," I said as I cast a stone across the clear, calm water. "It's not just about the Vril. It is also about my son." "Oh God, Diana, please, don't tell me you have raised him into this nonsense." "Victor, you never listened. There was so much that your parents wanted to tell you, but you couldn't understand because you do not believe. Maximiano was here. He still is. I met him last night. No, I mean the original Maximiano. His spirit has been here with us all along. His ghost has never left our family." I hung my head as sorrow flooded my chest. To hear her say these things with such utter indoctrination crushed my every hope. "Diana, can't you see that these things are mad? If you will not believe me, then at least listen. The reason that we are supposed to marry was so that our child could have the greatest chance of housing Maximiano's spirit. He has awaited for a century to be reborn, and we were to provide him with the most fitting vessel. The Book of the Skull says that a spirit has the greatest chance of being reborn as a close proximity to its former self if the incarnation is of the same genetic lineage. By keeping our gene pool strong with Maximiano's blood, we increase the chances of the child having the same power as his forefather, and in fact, possibly retaining aspects of his memory and personality. And I suppose that by leaving the family, I almost destroyed the chances of this insane plan's success. Almost, but there was an alternative." I stared at her as her eyes told me that she dared not speak the truth of what she was thinking. Slowly the wheels in my mind were turning as everything I'd been told began to slowly drift together like flakes of winter snow, gradually forming a solid blanket of white. "Oh, dear Jesus. Tell me that you are not saying what I think you are saying. I stepped back in horror and repulsion as my uncle's words began to echo in my mind. Your father and Diana's husband were killed. Tell me this madness went no further than it already has. Her face had gone pale and bloodless as she turned her gaze from me in shame. It was the only way, she whispered to the wind, which tossed her carelessly over her eyes. You have all gone mad, I exclaimed. You don't understand. Maximiliano is going to be a great shaman. Don't you remember the old prophecy? The world as we know it is going to end, and Maximiliano and the others like him will save thousands. Even now, the animal spirit which guided and protected our patriarch is watching and waiting to use Maxi as his avatar. How could you? My father, he was your uncle, and you bore him a child. This is no family. This is some sick, fanatical cult of ghost worshippers. This boy, he is my brother. You mustn't be afraid. You have to accept this, Victor. Maxi needs you. You must be the father that you were born to be. Her pleas fell on deaf ears. I could tolerate no more. I turned from her and walked back towards the house as confusion and anger gnawed relentlessly at my insides. But the thought of entering that house and facing my uncle only brought more dismay and sorrow. This woman that I loved was completely lost to the delusions of my father and uncle. I thought of my mother and wondered how she could have allowed such a diseased mockery of her marriage to occur. Every moment I spent at this carnival of nightmares only served to plunge me farther into an abyss of delirium from which I felt I may never return. I found myself approaching the fence of my parents' villa and threw open the gate with mortified fury. I stood in the tall, uncut grass and gazed at the closed, lifeless windows with uncertainty and nausea. You deserve to die, I thought with disgust, as I remembered the kind couple who had taught me to row a boat on the lake but a few paces away. Do you really believe that? The voice was low and serious as it spoke from behind me. I turned to see the boy, Maxi, staring at me with amused interest. Believe what? I asked, as I tried to collect my wild emotions and stifle them behind a facade of formality. That your parents deserved to be murdered, he answered, as he ran his hand along the fence thoughtfully. I wondered if I had spoken out loud, but was certain I had not. Why would I think that? I played dumb, as I wondered if the boy had taken to my uncle's tricks early. He laughed incredulously as he stared at me with his dark and tranquil expression. You truly are a fool, aren't you, cousin? He said, mocking me. Don't you think you should have more respect for those older than you? I said, as my hands unconsciously folded into fists at my side. I would say the same of you, he laughed again, as I realized the truth of what he insinuated. I heard everything you said to Grandpa last night. I did not return as I was told. I climbed the balcony and listened through the open door. I wonder what flaw in your nature made you so blind. He said this as if it were a problem he had been pondering for some time. And then you proclaim your love for my mother and then break her to pieces only to walk away. You are quite the one for dramatic exits, I hear. It must be reassuring to know that you can crush people and then simply walk away, as if it were your right to harm them. Hold your tongue, you little shit, I expounded as I moved forward to grab him by his shirt. He definitely moved back and once more chuckled as I fell upon the bars of the fence. Oh, the great Victor does not like the taste of his own poison, he jibed as he ran his hand through the mass of thick black hair on his head. You might as well be gone then. You brought only misery with you, cousin. Mother and grandfather put too much stock in some inner strength they feel you might possess, but I don't see it. I see very far into your heart, Victor. I know a great many secrets as well. I know the reason you are such an idiot. I know the reason. You have no sight of your own. Your father knew as well. Your mother had her share of lovers, I gather, and you are the fruit of one of her side adventures. You should be grateful that you didn't end up on the steps of an orphanage. By the time you left, she confessed her little intrigue to the family. So you see, it was no great loss when you went out on your merry little way. They knew you were not a Maskhadov, and you therefore served no purpose. You're a liar, I shouted. No, I am the only one who has ever told you the truth. You should have stayed and married my mother. It would not have been as so great a betrayal of your great moral code after all. Ah, yes, but her mother and yours were sisters as well, but that is all in the past. I've seen you now, and I don't believe you are a worthy substitute for any father. I want you to school me on the ways of the outside world, but I feel that it has probably changed little since my time here before. People are still wicked, stupid, and greedy, just like you. I watched as he shook his head with what I could only infer was disappointment, and walked away down the path towards the lake where I had left his mother. As I thought of all he had said, I felt a scream building in my chest, which soon dissolved into sobs as I wept like a child on the doorstep of my childhood home. Why had I returned? Alone in my room, I pushed away the gnawing emotions which tormented me and sat on the side of the bed with the phone in my hand. It was time for me to call the office and confer with my manager on exactly how much time I would be spending away from work. I had only intended to stay for a day, but now, as the mire of my family's drama thickened around me, I could no longer conjecture as to time. I bit my lip with frustration as I thought of the cell phone and laptop I had been forced to abandon in Harlesburg due to my uncle's paranoia. I would even be forced to contact my workplace with a carefully protected private phone system provided at the house. Still, I wondered, what should I say? Would I be staying? Should I simply cut my losses and be gone from this madness as the boy Maxie had suggested? Never had my hatred for this family been so absolute, and yet still the strange conviction of my feelings for Diana would not subside. I would give them a week. These people who had raised me as one of their own, and the woman who I had once been intended to marry deserved at least that. There was a part of me which still remembered the boy's accusations, and I felt anger at the thought of giving him the satisfaction of watching me leave as he had predicted. I had endured this insanity for 18 years, and whether I was truly a Maskhadov or not, I could bear it for another 7 days. I called the number. "Hello?" I heard my manager's voice after several rings. "Henrik, it's Victor," I said, trying to sound casual and calm. "Oh, Victor, please tell me that you are returning. I am looking at the plans for this new line, and I need your input most vitally." "I am very sorry, Henrik, but I need at least another week." "A week?" "Well, of course, my friend, but please, tell me you have your computer handy." I thought for a moment, telling my boss that his lead software specialist had left his own laptop in another country seemed at best embarrassing and impossible to rationalize. I looked at my open day planner which lay beside me on the bed, and I saw my uncle's email address and sighed with relief. "Yes, I have a computer." "Good, then I will send you a copy of the schematics so that you can review them for me." "That would be fine," I said with relief at the congenial tone of his voice. I had strived to become a top competitor in my field, and this would be the first leave of absence I had ever taken to date. I was unsure of how Henrik was going to respond. I gave him the email address, and saying my goodbyes, hung up in a slightly better state of mind than when I had called. I had to remind myself that this was a business affair, and I must keep a level head if I were to succeed. Feeling wide awake, I decided on a walk before I retired. I quickly left my room and wandered the halls in order to avoid contact with any members of the household. Once outside, I breathed the fresh night air and began to once more feel in control of my destiny. As I walked across the grass, I noticed a fire burning beside the lake. I approached cautiously and stopped several yards back when I saw that it was the boy, Maxie, fishing beside his bonfire wrapped in a blanket and reading a book. I saw with astonishment that he held one of my uncle's long black pipes in his fingers, which he was smoking as he read. "You might as well join me, Victor," he called out, and once more I grimaced with irritation at the pretend second sight which my family flaunted so carelessly. "Aren't you a bit young for smoking?" I said, as I strode forward and sat down on the other side of the low, crackling flames. "I know, it is a terrible thing to do, such a young body, but old habits die hard. Every day I fight the urge to steal a bottle of vodka from grandfather's cabinet. So, I am to believe that these are things you enjoyed in your past life, then?" I said, chuckling sarcastically. "My dear Victor, you do not have to believe anything. But do not think that because of my harsh words I am completely without sympathy for you. Your situation is not one of your own doing, and I realize that. For someone such as you to believe in the things which you are being told would require an immense amount of faith on your part. I simply think that you need to make a decision. And I am not willing to play foolish games with you in order to sway you." "And what decision is that?" I said as he reeled in his line and, inspecting the bait, cast it back out into the lake with practiced ease. "Whether or not you wish to be a part of this family. There comes a time in every person's life when they must evaluate all that they have learned of their kin and decide whether they feel that they are still a part of that line. Many feel they have no choice, and perhaps they are the lucky ones. But truly in life, we often simply tell ourselves we are without alternatives because we have already made our decision." I was growing uncomfortable by the boy's method of speech. I was beginning to feel as if I were being lectured by one much older than myself, and was finding the tone insulting to my pride. "What do you know of such things? Am I supposed to heed your wisdom because it came from beyond the grave?" He laughed. "I am not going to masquerade as a child for the sake of your doubt and vanity, Victor. If your ego cannot withstand my manner, then walk away." He looked over at me with his strange dark eyes, and I winced with shock as for one moment I saw someone much older gazing back. Just for now, I would humor him. "What is it like then?" "What?" "Living, dying, being reborn." He looked back at the waters of the lake. "Do you remember your childhood clearly?" "Yes, for the most part. But only in segments, correct? You see vague scenes and recollections of various events, but all could be discounted as fantasy if you so desired. It is like that for everyone, I guess. I remember that during times like this in the summer, all of us children would fish during the day, and then at night our parents would cook what we caught, and we would eat by the moonlight." "Were there many children?" "Oh, yes. Besides me and Diana, there would be children from Mother and Aunt Oksana's family. They were sisters from a family called the Zolkins." "Yes. Relatives of the medium, Archip Zoltan, who was friends with Afanasi. They were lovers, I was always told. It was another family tradition to marry psychics with psychics to keep the gift pure, but considering your ghost was supposed to have been present throughout all of it, I would think you would remember." "Spirit recalls the spirit, and flesh recalls the flesh," he said wistfully. "Are you familiar with that quote?" "It is from the book." "So you have read it, then?" "Some, but much was beyond my understanding. It spoke of other worlds and entities which fought for control over such things. There was a lot about ghosts, I recall. A ghost perceives and remembers differently than a living being. The dead experience their memories in a way which is almost overwhelming. They are often more or less as unaware of the living world as it is of them. A medium can focus the attention of a spirit temporarily, but otherwise, they sift through image and dream like dust blowing in a windstorm. I remember things from my past life as if they were dim recollections from the shadows of my sleep. But the force of his personality grows stronger each day. I know enough to have realized that he stumbled across something very powerful, quite by accident, and set free a group of entities which had been imprisoned since a time out of history. What kind of entities? Demons? Gods? I remembered some of the tale from my childhood, but these memories were foggy at best. Maximano had been in a gold mining labor camp, and the workers had uncovered a sealed cavern which they opened. The cavern contained a number of spirits held within by ancient shamans who had imprisoned them when they could no longer be controlled. Being a natural psychic, Maximiano had been an easy target, but one of the spirits had protected and guided him. However, he could not give himself over to the spirit, and so when the time came, it could not save him from execution. You must realize that what we call demons or gods are like wild bursts of energy blazing through the cosmos. They are here, but not entirely. What they become is largely dependent on who uses their energy. I remember things from that existence as dreams within dreams. I remember a cave, and I remember dying. I remember that there was a row of men with guns before me, and only one was to fire an actual bullet. I recall thinking that I knew which gun the bullet came from that killed me. I remember that I loved my children, and I wish I could have said goodbye to them. I remember that my wife had red hair and laughed like a man. I remember that I loved to go fishing and drink vodka and smoke my pipe. My flesh remembers things of my flesh. The darkness and visions of the afterlife are lost to me. But you have been taught these things. Can't you see that? You have been rigorously educated in this man's life, even if you do not realize it. I'm not going to perform for you like a dancing monkey in order to prove myself. I spent a lifetime telling fortunes, and I'm done with it. But you are so young to have your mind clouded with these morbid fantasies. He looked at me as his face broke into a smile. You really are not a bad soul, Victor. You are really worried about me. How many times have you thought that I should be taken away from here during our conversation? I lost count. He laughed again. I think I may like you, despite your ignorance and stupidity. I could endure no more of his mockery and stood to leave his arrogant presence. But wait, you have a question you have not asked. I stopped and looked back at him. He leaned on his elbow and held the pipe in his lips with natural ease. Yes, if I were to pretend for just this instant that I believed what you were saying, what could you tell me about the Vril? When that cave was opened, several of these entities were released. From that moment on, a race began, and the countdown to catastrophe initiated. There are those all around the world who have the potential to use these demon gods for any number of purposes, but in the end, it is they who will be in thrall of the energies with which they tamper. At their very best, these entities are selfish and animalistic. At their worst, they are a contagion which devours and reshapes reality into twisted nightmares. Psychics are their catalysts, and only through them is their power truly realized. It is my belief that the Vril have already come into contact with at least one of these anomalies. And if there is even one latent psychic among them, then the results could be uncontainable. And what of the one which you claim protected you? It is here waiting. I have yet to pass into the awakening, which will allow the entity full access into this realm. I knew of the awakening as I had awaited it with disappointment throughout my youth. And then what will become of you? I will be its shaman and its avatar. I am so sorry for you, Maxie. I will only tell you this once. When I leave here, I will take you with me if you wish to go. There will be legal battles and trials, but you will have a chance at a normal life. You can go to a school with other children and have friends. You can play video games and ride a bike on the street. You would do that, would you? He said thoughtfully. To give you a chance at the life I never had? Of course. You are a good soul, Victor. Of that I have no doubt. He leaned back up and began once more to read from his book as I walked away. I began to wonder if it wasn't my duty to remove Maxie from this mad brainwashing before it was too late. I awakened in the morning and walked down the hall to breakfast. The events of the previous night had given me a new perspective, and I was resolved to no longer let the influence of the Maskhadov suggestion control my emotions. My goals were simple. I would try to convince Diana to leave with me and bring Maxie. I would evaluate the holdings left by my parents and either negotiate a sale of the shares to my uncle or, if necessary, sell the stock and assets myself. I passed by my uncle's study and saw that he and Yakov were at his computer studying the screen with perplexed interest. "Victor, come here," Yuri shouted from across the room. I went to his side and looked over Yakov's shoulder as he typed with frustration at the keyboard. The screen was a confusing labyrinth of numbers and letters filing endlessly downward to the bottom of the monitor. "What's going on?" I said, yawning as I gazed distractedly at the mass of data. "There was an email on my personal account this morning, and when I opened it, this began." "It's a virus," Yakov said as he frantically tried to shut down the hard drive. "You didn't give my address to anyone, did you?" Yuri said as he studied me with anxious scrutiny. "Just my boss, Enric. He had some plans he wanted me to look over, but I'm sure it has nothing to do with this." "Your boss? You gave my email address to your boss in Germany?" His ancient face was aghast with wonder and rising fury. "Well, you couldn't very well expect me to just put my work on hold the entire time I was here." I laughed nervously as he clenched his fists and shook with rage. "This virus is uploading every megabyte of data on the network," Yakov said with helpless terror. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" Yuri said, grabbing my shirt with absurd strength for one of his years. "They could find us. After all this time, trying to keep the location of our home a secret, you gave it away to impress your boss?" He was shaking me violently, and for a moment I thought he would strike me. I pushed him away and was grateful when he did not fall to the floor. "This is crazy," I yelled. "This paranoia and endless delusion must end." Enric is a designs manager for a car manufacturer, and you would have me believe he is in league with this ridiculous Vril society. We have the most advanced antivirus software on the planet, and this virus has plowed through it as if it were a free download, Yakov said, his voice weak and wavering. This thing was created with a single purpose, and that was to devour our hard drive and its contents be sent back to the creator. Get out! My uncle shouted as he slammed his fist down on the desk. Get your things and leave. Yakov will take you back to Moscow, and then we will leave as well. We are no longer safe here. I looked at him and saw the full extent of the derangement and delirium into which he had fallen. With no more to say, I left and went to find Diana. My time at the house of the Maskhadovs had once more ended. I would try to make her see that she needed to be with me, away from the lies of this family. As I was rushing to meet her, she flew through the front doors of the house with young Maxie close behind. She was breathless and disheveled, as if she had run the whole way from her home. "What has happened?" she said as she stormed past me. I had no time to answer before I was met with cold and angry stare of the dark-featured 13-year-old. "You ignorant fool," he said accusingly, as he stood proudly before me. "You cannot speak to me like that," I replied. My frustration began once more to set my blood hot and boiling. "They'll come soon, you know," he said as he stepped close, and I was imagining the thrill of striking him across the face. "No one will be able to leave here. They will come, and most likely kill us all." "Then we will all be happy little goats now, won't we?" I sneered. "Isn't that what you all believe? That we will be killed only to float about as if nothing has happened?" "You are more of a child than I am, you simpleton. There are fates which can befall the dead, which would make you curl into a ball and weep with the thought of it." I was preparing to explode at the boy when Diana appeared, crying and hysterical from my uncle's study. "How could you be so ignorant?" she shouted as her hands rubbed and twisted upon themselves like writhing snakes. "After all they taught us as children, you should have known better. But you just refused to believe. You have doomed us all." "This is insanity!" I screamed as I pulled at my hair with unbound disbelief and rage. "How can you people possibly believe in this utter nonsense?" It was then that I heard a low sound coming from the distance through the open windows of the dining room. Sveta dashed to one of them and gazed out over the field with a look of astonishment and terror on her face. "What is it? What is out there?" I asked. I began to slowly move towards her. "It is a helicopter. It is coming over the wall," she answered, her voice quiet and timid as she backed away. I went to where she had stood and saw, just as she has described, a small helicopter flying in and now landing in the field adjacent to the house. Suddenly the rage within me vanished, as it was replaced with bizarre incongruity. For a moment nothing seemed real as the propellers began to slow to a stop and the side door opened. I watched, stunned and bewildered, as Enric Adler, my manager, stepped from the craft and began walking across the field. I turned to see the entire household gathered in a group, silent and accusing behind me. It's just a coincidence," I stammered as I began to walk towards the door. "There must be some explanation." I said this out loud, but repeated it over and over in my mind as I walked out and ran to meet Enric in the green spring grass. "Oh, there you are, Victor," he said with a smile as he clapped his hand onto my shoulder. "How nice of you to rush out here to meet me." "Sir, forgive me, but I do not understand." I was nearly stuttering with confusion as his smile faded and his face became stern. "But you should know," he said with a certain annoyance. "We have come for the book." The book? I looked into his stark blue eyes and saw only cold determination. We have no time for charades now, Victor. I realize that you're in an awkward position, but please consider this. I have employed you now for a number of years and would like to continue to do so. But if you should act in a way as an obstacle to the goals of the company, then I would be very disappointed. I would never want to jeopardize my position, sir, but please, tell me, what is this all about? What it is about is that we gave you a job and kept you very comfortable for a number of years with the hopes that eventually you would contact your family again. Now, after all this time, you have finally paid back the investment we put into you by leading us here. There are a number of ways which things can continue from here, dear boy. You can go into that house and tell your family to give us the Book of the Skull, and if they do so, all will be well. Sir, they will not do that, I answered, and saw the faintest gleam of hatred stirring in his expression. He removed his old-fashioned fedora hat and ran his long, hairy fingers through the sparse gray hair which still clung to his balding head. That leaves us with the alternative, which is that tonight I will return and we will destroy everything in sight and torture everyone in that house until someone gives us the location of the dome. You must understand that I am but a representative of a very powerful group of people. Victor, they can do things which would make your worst nightmares look like visions of paradise. I will give you until nightfall to convince your relatives to do as I have asked. We will be watching, and if I do not see you standing on this spot at dusk with the book in your hands, then all manner of terrible things shall befall these people and yourself. You see, we do not want to make a mess here. Even at this secluded location, eventually, the murder of so many wealthy people will draw unwanted attention. But do not doubt that it can be done. With these chilling words, he turned and began to walk back to the helicopter, where 3 men in dark clothes and sunglasses stood calmly waiting. "Don't let me down, Victor," he said over his shoulder. "You've never let me down before. Do not start now." I watched as he boarded and gestured for the pilot to restart the engine. I felt my legs weaken and my knees buckle as I fell to the ground, slumped over like a puppet whose strings had just been cut. After the helicopter had rose up and departed into the morning sky, I saw that it was Diana who came to my side. She looked down at me with a wretched mixture of sorrow, disappointment, and pity. "It was all true," I whispered with bitter acceptance. "I have been a pawn in this game since the day I was born." "Do you believe me now?" she asked. She sat down beside me, her look lost and forlorn. "I believe that they are as mad as you," I answered, and she stared back at me with distant, unreadable thoughts. "Are you so filled with pride that you cannot accept what is right in front of you? Do you know what could happen if they have the book? Just give it to them, Diana. Please, just let this end. Go with me. Lead a normal life. Where will we go? Back to Harlesburg so you continue to play at your little job while they unravel the fabric of this reality and destroy it? Don't you understand that they will torture us, that they will kill us, that they will do the same to your son? It's just a book. It's just a fiction written by some mystic for publicity 100 years ago. If you cannot see the truth, then I fear we are truly doomed. I felt a wave of nausea begin to pass over me as my body began to grow feverish and weak. My hands were shaking, whether with fear or my escalating physical breakdown, I could not tell. The day had begun to darken, and as I raised my gaze skyward, I saw an accumulating mass of black, ominous clouds rolling in over the blue morning sky. I heard the distant roll of thunder as lightning flashed from the depths of the massing storm. "It's coming," Diana said under her breath. "What?" I said, as another wave of dizziness seemed to make even remaining upright a considerable trial. "The entity," she whispered with awe, as the grass seemed to grow a shade darker in the shadow of the tempest. Maxie was right. They have already contacted one of the Dark Ones, and it is coming here for us. "Nonsense!" I gasped as a hot spurt of bile erupted in my throat, causing me to gasp and choke. As the wind began to rise, I watched the hedges and the bushes around the house begin to bend and sway beneath the force. A strange scent was on the breeze, which reminded me of the deep woods in the summer after a long rain, and beneath that, another smell, reminiscent of old bread and decaying wood. Diana was pulling me to my feet, but the dull throbbing ache in my bones made walking a labor of my stamina. "Come, we must go to the house," she said, as I leaned heavily on her shoulder, and still not too ill to be moved by the warmth of her body so close to mine. "I love you so much, Diana. I would never have done anything to harm you or any of them." "I know, Victor," she replied as raindrops began to fall in cold dozens from the darkness which now encompassed the dawn. "I believe that fate forgives fools," she laughed as I struggled up the steps. "That would be some blessing. My God, what is happening? I felt fine a few moments ago." "I think that the entity's presence has signaled your awakening." We stumbled into the house as she led me to a chair and then closed the doors and locked them behind us. "I cannot awaken," I said bitterly. "I am no Maskhadov. Your own son has told me." "That is true. But you have forgotten that your mother was still your mother, and she was a Zulkin, just like my mother. Their great-aunt was one of the greatest trance mediums in history." "Oh, yes. The legendary Archip Zulkin, the toast of Europe for some time, I believe." Diana was staring out the window as the day became as dark as night. Brilliant flashes of lightning followed the hollow explosions of thunder outside as I laughed at myself with misery. "Will this bitterness and scorn of yours never end?" she said, as she turned to meet the others, who stood wide-eyed and frightened. But for Maxie, his look was one of rigid acceptance as he studied my condition. "It is done," she announced. "They are demanding the book by nightfall, and if we refuse, we will be captured and questioned." "This storm, it is the coming of the Dark One, isn't it?" Yuri said. "Yes. Our worst fears have been proven true. The Vril members are now thralls of one of the escaped entities." "But why even wait?" Yakov asked as he held my uncle by the arm protectively. "They don't want to make a mess," I chuckled. "That was a lie," Maxie retorted. "They fear we may have some power of our own." "Well, they were pretty far off on that one," I said. Another chill threatened to send me into spasms of uncontrollable shaking. "That may not be true either," the boy said as he scrutinized me even closer. "You are very ill, cousin. Yes, the stress of finding out that my entire existence is a lie and that I have probably destroyed the only family I have has given me a bit of a cold." "That is very funny," he said as he leaned closer and gazed deep into my eyes. "You can be very funny when you want to be." His words were masking a series of complex thoughts, which to my shock I felt as if I could almost see them as well as my own. I felt as if I was on the verge of plummeting over the edge into a dark chasm of delirium. "You know, I've been told that, I rambled as the burning fire in my body seemed to be scorching through my clothes. I have friends, you know. I felt as if I were mumbling through some intoxication as the boy took my hand and the others watched with intense interest. I met with a group of men for cards and cigars every Friday. Is that right? He said, but once more. I could see that he was merely keeping me distracted as he searched in my eyes for something else. You were quite popular then, I suppose. Ugh, I thought I was. But now I'm beginning to think that it was all part of this devil's game. No, I'm sure your little group is truly fond of you, cousin. And the women too, no doubt. I've had my fair share of female interests, but I cannot love them. The room around me was now whirling as the faces of those who watched with marked anticipation began to blur and distort. I have always only loved one, and that is your mother. Maxie smiled broadly as he released my hand and turned to those gathered around my chair. There is hope yet, he proclaimed. What do you mean? Yuri said as he began to regain his composure and came forward to look upon me. He has been chosen, Maxie said to their astonished faces. Chosen for what? Yakov asked dumbly. I believe that it is possible that Victor has had a single latent psychic ability all along. And what ability is that? To grow sick and die when he is needed? Sveta expostulated, drawing reprimanding looks from the others. No, the ability to carry the spirit of an entity which has guarded our family for generations. It's not possible. Diana was shocked as she looked on at my half-conscious form. When the ancient shamans sealed the cavern which imprisoned the Dark Ones, they begged one which had remained beneficial to their needs to guard its entrance. It was that spirit which protected my former incarnation from possession when they were released. That spirit has chosen Victor, as unlikely as it may seem, to be his host and avatar. Victor will be the new shaman of the Bear God. But you were meant for that honor, Maxie. Diana looked from her son with confusion. So I thought, but the spirit has chosen, and for whatever reason, this ancient power has aligned itself with the soul of my cousin. God help us all, Sveta said, as she made the sign of the cross over her chest. So, this sickness, Yuri said as he placed his hand on Maxie's shoulder, this is the beginning of the transition. So it seems. Will the awakening occur in time? We must wait and see, but for now, we must take Victor to a bed. This process will be agonizing for him, and there is nothing which will ease the pain without slowing the transformation. But what does all this mean? Yakov asked my uncle. It means that we may still have a chance, Yuri answered with the smallest glimmer of hope shining in his old eyes. It was only as I was carried by my uncle's assistant to the couch we lay in the study, with fever forcing my body and mind to entirely new levels of pain and delirium, that I finally began to wonder if maybe I had been wrong. I had dreams, or perhaps saw visions of a vast Siberian wasteland. I saw people of an ancient culture gathered around a huge fire in the darkness of night as their shamans chanted and called out over a macabre altar made up entirely of the collected skulls of a lost race of bears. Instinctively, I knew that the representative of this now extinct line was their patron deity, a foreboding and savage god who had led them over sheets of ice and protected them through a winter which lasted lifetimes. Another dream revealed a group of similar priests who wandered alone through the wilderness in search of visions. They ate nothing but a select fungus which grew from the permafrost and found in the loneliest dark reaches of the world ancient and dark evils with whom they conversed. Bargains were made, deals were struck, and souls were lost as the rogue holy men succumbed to the temptations offered by the sinister entities. Thinking that they could control and wield these energies would cost them their humanity, as they were stripped of their living essence and transformed into horrors. I witnessed decades which passed into centuries as the people of these lands routinely fell prey to the horrid creatures which would come from the wilderness to torture and feed on them. Only the Bear of Caves would protect them, and in time, his priests, wearied by generations of war with the Dark Ones, created a ritual to at last rid their dwindling populace of the monstrous avatars forever. I saw only glimpses of the battle, which at last ended when the Dark Ones were finally sealed away in the bowels of the earth by powerful spells which even they could not transgress. In time, the tribes would disperse, and the power of the shamans would dwindle as magic in their bloodlines diluted. Their ancient religion, worshipping nature and the spirits of their ancestors, would become myth as the new world of modern men prevailed. However, the bear would remain and watch over the lands where the horrors were bound. He settled into a slumber which would last millennia, until one day the intrusive probing of the modern man opened the gate once more, and the Dark Ones were set free. What may have been chance, but what was more likely fate, had delivered an individual descended from that primordial line of shamans to their very doorstep of the imprisoned. The entities had swarmed upon him in a desperate battle to usurp his soul and possess his body. It was only by the intervention of the great bear spirit that he was spared damnation. Sadly, the man's terror and confusion would not allow him to accept the gift which the ancient god had offered him. He went mad with the visions and prophecies of an age to come, a time filled with machines and war. His words would seal his destiny, and his life would be ended with the loud crack of rifle fire. As these flashing scenes of misery and magic ended, I found myself alone in the darkness of a cavern, listening to the trickle of water as it ran from some hidden spring in the earth. All was cold and quiet, as from the silence, a shape began to move towards me. I felt no fear, but only wonder, as the prehistoric god made his presence known. In my mind, I heard his offer, and in my heart, I accepted. You have spent a lifetime regretting your birth and hating your blood, the low voice said, echoing through the cavern. Know now that you were never the child of men, but the offspring of a far greater line. Rejoin your ancestors and be proud, for now you are my son. The flesh and the spirit were filled with a strength and well-being which I never would have dreamed possible, as the memories and experiences of 1,000 souls ran through me like cool, cleansing water. In a moment, I was reborn, and Victor Stefan Maskhadov was no more.